Many of you who listen to this program also study linguistics, either on the graduate or undergraduate level. For the latter, I hope that this episode will be helpful, because I'll be giving my thoughts and opinions on graduate programs in linguistics. Should you go into it? What does it mean if you go into it? What should you expect from it? This is the Linguistics Podcast. Questions or comments can be directed to Twitter at LinguistChris or via email to linguistchris@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to the Linguistics Podcast. My name is Chris, and today's topic is a little bit different, different from the norm that we normally go over. I'm not talking about linguistics per se, but I'm talking about graduate programs in linguistics. These are going to be either MA or PhD programs, and I'm going to try and address some concerns that I've heard from people who have written to me about thinking about going into a graduate program in linguistics, and I'm going to try and sort of touch on a lot of questions I've gotten, and hopefully this will be helpful to anyone who is at that point, or at least thinking about approaching that point where it's time to make a decision about going to graduate school, whether or not they should, what you should expect, what kind of programs you should look for, etc., etc. Let me preface all of this by saying I'm not a professional counselor, academic counselor or otherwise, so you should take everything I'm saying today with a grain of salt, and by that I mean you should just sort of take it as general purpose advice, as you would take advice from anyone else in your life who is not giving advice in an official capacity. Okay? So with that being said, here are my thoughts on graduate programs in linguistics and the field as a field of study that you can continue your education in, and what kind of benefits you might get from that, what kind of benefits you might not get from that. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, are you really that interested in linguistics? And it sounds like a funny question to start with, because obviously if you're listening to this podcast right now, you probably are fairly interested in linguistics, especially if you listen to it a lot, because let's be honest, it's not a common interest. A lot of people think that this kind of thing is quite boring, actually. And so if you do find that you are sort of really looking at linguistics a lot, you're learning a lot about it, you really enjoy it, then that should be your first clue that maybe you should at least look into grad school in linguistics. That is to say, if you are already an undergraduate studying linguistics. Okay, there are many reasons that you can major in linguistics as an undergraduate, right? And some of those have nothing to do with graduate school. So it is a good sort of general purpose major, for example. You can double major in linguistics and something else quite nicely. Often people will do linguistics and computer science. Those match up pretty well. However, that's not to say that if you are an undergraduate in linguistics that you're definitely going to graduate school, right? But there are a subset of undergraduates in linguistics that might be thinking about it. And all I'm saying is, if you do think about it, make sure that you are really, really, really interested in the field, because graduate school will mean, even if you get an MA, it's another at least 2 years of study in that field, and it's study that is more intense than anything you get in an undergraduate course. So that's step one, essentially, is figure out if this is really where your interest is. If not, you need to look elsewhere. You need to figure out where it is. The second question you need to ask is, how much interest do you have in linguistics? How long do you think you could spend studying it? And I'm saying that in a very realistic sense. A PhD program in linguistics is generally a 5-year program. So you need to take that into account. If you want to get a PhD in linguistics, you're going to be studying straight linguistics for probably longer than you studied it at all in your undergraduate years. And as I said, the study is more intense, right? Because it's more individually directed, and I'll explain that in a second. But that's a question you need to ask. Can you handle 5 years of nothing but linguistics? Now, if you're a person that thinks, hey, that sounds really, really cool, I wish I could do that, then keep listening. Then maybe you are one of those people that should look into a graduate program in linguistics. So far I've talked nothing about the expectations of the end result of a graduate program in linguistics. Obviously, you end up with a degree, either an MA or a PhD. But what you need to ask yourself now is perhaps the most important question, and that is, what do you want to get out of it? Okay? What do you think that you will get out of it? Let me start by being a bringer of bad news, a bringer of news that you've probably already heard, but the days of getting a PhD and falling into a tenured professorship are over. They've been over for quite some time. It simply doesn't happen. The reason being, universities for quite some time now have produced more PhD candidates and PhD holders than they have positions for. Okay, so there is a massive surplus of PhDs in any field. This is true not just of linguistics. This is just across the board. You have a surplus of PhDs. Okay, so that's point one that you need to keep in mind. Don't expect that if you go into a graduate program in linguistics, you're essentially set for life, because that's not true. It's not true by any means. It will be a long haul if you do decide to go into linguistics, and that's one reason why I say you need to make sure that you are extremely, extremely interested in this topic to the point that you cannot imagine working in any other field. And that's a hard point to get to, I think. It's a point that even I sometimes question myself on, right? I will go through these phases where I'll say, maybe I would be happier if I was doing something else. And I think that's quite a natural phase to go through for a lot of people. But it is something that you should be prepared to face, right? Because you're going to be asking yourself that question a lot, because it really can get quite intense, especially when you're not sure about the future, right? You don't have this nice protective blanket that you would have had 100 years ago, going into the field, and you can say, yes, as soon as I'm done with my PhD, I'm going to be working at a university. It may not happen. In fact, statistically, it probably won't happen. But that's not to discourage you. That's to be realistic. Okay, I know it sounds like discouraging news, but all I want you to do is be realistic about the future prospects of a degree in linguistics, a graduate degree in linguistics. Now, with that being said, there are people who get PhDs in linguistics and, of course, go and work at universities. It's not to say that nobody does it. Obviously, there are positions out there. There just aren't a whole lot. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Linguist List. It's at linguistlist.org. And they have a job posting section, which is very popular in the field. And it will give you a good idea of what kind of positions are available. It's normally fits, within 10 or 20 pages is all the listings they have available around the world. So that gives you kind of a perspective on exactly what kind of odds you will technically be up against. If you're like me, I don't think it's necessarily that bad news, because obviously it makes everything more competitive, but that just means you need to be better, right? So, you can use it in that kind of a sense. You can say, I'm going to be the best I can. And if you are good enough, then chances are, I think, you will probably end up with something good. At least that's the rosy outlook. But just don't take it as an expectation, okay? Now, with that kind of outlook, that realistic outlook that you may absolutely get nothing out of a graduate degree in linguistics, you need to sort of change your expectations of the programs you're going into. And before I mention that, let me mention really quickly, obviously the other option for graduate school in linguistics besides a PhD is an MA. There, you really change the equation. First of all, PhD students and MA students are treated differently in terms of funding, oftentimes. And when I talk about funding in a minute, I will get into that. But the biggest question you need to ask yourself between PhD and MA, again, how much time do you think you could spend researching the topic? If you are truly, truly, truly interested in linguistics and you have 5 years to kill, go for a PhD. If you want to sort of get in there quickly, or if you're going into linguistics in an applied sense, so you need an advanced degree in linguistics to do something like ESL teaching, that's what the MA technically is for, the TESOL track. So that is, those are the questions you should be asking yourself in terms of PhD versus MA. I think the biggest question would be, how much time do you have to kill? If you're young, you got 5 years, just do PhD. I don't know of any reason why you wouldn't, and I'll explain why in the coming moments. Now, like I said, you may get nothing out of it. So what does that mean for the program you're looking for? let me drill this next point into your head. This is overall the most important point I can make to you. A good graduate program will pay your fees. You will be fully funded. In other words, your fees for classes will be paid, your fees for enrollment at the university will be paid, and you will generally get a living stipend so that you can sustain yourself while you are doing your studies. It's generally not much. It's pretty much at the poverty line, but it is possible to sustain yourself. That is the key, okay? And let me say this again. A good graduate program will pay your way. Why is that so important? Because you can't say it's a good investment if you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So with a realistic outlook, you say, what is the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is you get a PhD in linguistics and you never find a job that will allow you to use it. That's the absolute worst case scenario. That absolutely depressing case is possible. You have to at least admit that to yourself. Now, with that in mind, if your graduate program has paid your way and sustained you for those 5 years, you're not out anything in terms of financials. You are at the same point that you would have been at before you started in the program. So your net loss is nothing. You still run a net positive. Okay? Yeah, you're older, but big whoop, who cares, right? So at least then you could say, hey, I did this because I really enjoy linguistics. I took 5 years of my life studying it, and I'm proud of that. Boom, done. You're still in positive territory. If you go into debt for a PhD in linguistics and you don't get a job with it, you retain the debt. I mean, that's a big issue. That's something that you really need to keep in mind. You don't want to go into debt for a degree that may not lead to a positive outcome. So I can't stress it enough. A good graduate program will pay your fees. If you're looking at a graduate program that does not pay your fees, I personally would take that as a cue to look elsewhere. There are still graduate programs that pay your fees. The good ones do. Look for one that does. Clearly, they're going to be harder to get into, but again, then it becomes a question of I need to work extra hard, I need to do extra work to make myself look better and prove to whatever institution I'm trying to get into that I'm the right choice, that I am somebody that they should essentially pay to go to school for the next 5 years. Okay? Obviously, you don't get anything for free. Generally, these graduate programs that pay your way will also require you to do things like teaching, or be a teaching assistant, or a reader or something like that. So you should expect to have to do work on top of your studies. But believe me, it's much better doing that than doing work down at the local fast food joint and taking on debt in order to pay your class fees. So when you work for a university that pays your way, oftentimes it's just automatically better, right? Because you're always staying within your field. If you're TAing for a course in linguistics, it's much better than working someplace where that has nothing to do with linguistics, right? So at least, even though you're working in the field for those 5 years. It's a much, much better experience, and it's a much, much better position to be in should the worst case scenario come to fruition at the end of everything. Okay? So keep that in mind. That's why I was sort of pushing that point home where you might get nothing out of it. If you have a program that pays your way, you always automatically get something out of it. Not necessarily financial, but something. You have a goal that you can attain that's not going to harm you later in life. Okay? So the key is making the experience a net positive. Then find a program that supports you. Now, what else is important besides programs that support you? Before I move on, still talking about funding then, programs will more likely support PhD students than MA students. I don't know if that is the case around the nation, although I have heard, by the way, this is all true for America, right? And I don't know if around America this is necessarily the case, but certainly all the schools that I've seen in my general area, the MA students do not get the same kind of funding opportunities as the PhD students. That is to say, the PhD students have top priority where funding is concerned. So the departments will fund PhD students first, and MA students will get the leftovers. Now, that's not to say that you won't get funding as an MA student. It's to say that you're not as likely to get funding as an MA student. So you have to keep that in mind as well. And again, this goes hand in hand with the fact that MAs are often more of an applied track degree. So you have something in mind that you want to go for, that you need the MA for example, TESOL or ESL. You then go and get the MA, and you might go into debt for it because you know what kind of return to expect. Okay, so this is something else to keep in mind. But PhD programs, definitely make sure you're funded, period. Now, you have one criteria to look for when you're looking for a PhD or MA program. You want to try and get funding. What else should you look for? Well, obviously you need to find a school, or particularly a program, that fits your interests. It's not enough to say, I'm interested in linguistics, therefore I want to go and get a PhD in it. You have to be interested in some aspect of linguistics. It's not even quite enough to say I'm interested in sociolinguistics, or I'm interested in psycholinguistics, or I'm interested in computational linguistics. Well, you can say you're interested in computational linguistics. That one is actually narrow enough. But besides that, you sort of need to narrow down your interests a little bit more than you probably already have if you're an undergraduate. You can say, I'm interested in syntax. Okay, what kind of syntax? I'm interested in Indo-European syntax, which, by the way, is probably not that good of a thing to be interested in and go into a program because it's pretty saturated. But these are the kind of questions you should be asking yourself. Try and narrow down your interests as narrow as possible, and find multiple interests too. There's no reason that you can't have multiple interests. They don't even have to be related to each other. When I applied to programs, I was very interested in second language acquisition, as well as language processing, computational linguistics. And as I've progressed in my program, I've done absolutely nothing with second language acquisition. But language processing, I found quite a few other items that I'm interested in that relate to it. And that's where I've been headed. So it's not the case that you need to pick one thing right off the bat. You can have a sort of broad range of specific topics. What you don't want to have is a narrow range of broad topics. Okay. Now, once you have your interests pretty much down pat, then you want to try and find departments that match your interests. How do you do that? Well, you look at who works in the departments. What is the faculty that is working in the department? Look at their research. Look at the things that they work with. If you can find, a percentage of a department which seems to be related to what you want or what you're interested in, that's probably a good match. Now, you need to keep in mind that some departments are different from others in that they allow you more or less freedom with your personal individual research. So that's something else that you need to keep in mind. And to find that out, you need to ask around, right? You need to, you could even talk to the faculty themselves. How free would I be to sort of take my research in my own direction? How much would I have to sort of mimic the research going on in the department? Let me say this. There is always a sort of mimicking effect that happens. And I say mimicking in a very loose sense, simply because I can't think of a better word right now. When you are in a department, your research is sort of molded by the faculty in that department because you are at their mercy, essentially. They are the people that are on your committees for your research. They are the people that are making the decisions as to whether or not your research is approved or denied in terms of progressing in your program. So at some level, they call all the shots. And if they don't like your research, then you're in a bad situation. Now, this is where I say departments will differ. Some departments will say, I like your research. It's not related to anything anybody is doing in the department, but we understand it, and therefore we allow it to pass. Some departments will say, this is not related to anything any of us are doing in the department. We don't have the means to allow you to take on, an individual project of this magnitude. Therefore, you need to change it to fit better with the faculty interest. That can happen. Certainly, all kinds of things can happen in academia. So these are things to keep in mind. It's still in your best interest to try and get the closest match that you can. Okay, I know I've been babbling about finding a good match for a while now, but it really is important. So, what are the major points about all this? I've been talking now for for quite some time. What is the take-home message? Step 1, ensure that you are interested enough in linguistics that you aren't in it for money. It is not the case that you get a PhD in linguistics and automatically start making tons of money after you graduate. It's very, very unlikely. It's going to be a long haul. Academic employment is hard to get. It's very, very competitive. There's tons of politics involved in it. It's difficult. So you need to really be interested in continuing research in a field and progressing the field itself. That's where your main interest needs to lie. If you're successful, there can be personal gain in it. By personal gain, I mean financial gain. But you can't take it as an automatic thing. Okay? So ensure that you're not in it for the money, because the field is notoriously job short. Okay, let me just put it that way. That's number 1. Number 2, decide whether or not you want to go for PhD versus MA. That is probably a fairly simple question for a lot of you. Number 3, narrow your interests. Okay. And number 4, find a graduate program that matches those interests and this part is crucial, pays your way. And again, if you're going for an MA program, that may be less of a priority for you. If you're going for a PhD program, make sure it pays your way. You don't need to go into debt for something that may not be a good investment. Okay? So I hope that this has been helpful to any of you who are in this position trying to consider whether or not to go to graduate school. Let me say as an anecdote to finish all this up, I've been very happy in my program so far. I'm happy in the direction that I'm going in. I will be happy to have completed my PhD, even if I get nothing from it. And that, I think, is the healthiest outlook you can have in graduate school. Again, it is very intense to get a PhD in any field. So to have a healthy outlook, and for me to have one that I can't really be disappointed with at the end of everything, provided I actually complete my PhD, that's a great position to be in. And I hope that all of you can end up with similar outlooks no matter what decision you make. Okay? So thank you as always for listening. And as always, send questions via Twitter @LinguistChris or via email linguistchris@gmail.com. Thanks again.